You should have stayed a waitress, Miss Mensah.
The man standing in Zuri's studio apartment wasn't supposed to be there. He leaned against the window overlooking the Kanawha River, Charleston's night skyline glittering behind him like broken promises. His smile came slow, the kind that warned of violence wrapped in politeness. "You should have stayed a waitress, Miss Mensah." His South African accent turned her name into something dangerous. Pouring champagne, minding your business, living small. Zuri's fingers tightened around her phone behind her back, thumb hovering over the emergency contact she'd been told to use only if her life depended on it. "But no," he continued, stepping closer, "you had to whisper secrets to the Korean Mafia boss. You had to be clever." Her heart hammered against her ribs.
"I don't know what you're talking about."
His laugh was cold. "Don't you? That contract at the Greenbrier? The deal you destroyed with one sentence?" He tilted his head. "Daniel Seo is a businessman now, legitimate, respectable. He won't protect you the way his father would have." But what this man didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Daniel Seo was already 3 blocks away, and when the Korean Mafia boss discovered someone had threatened what was his, mercy wasn't part of the vocabulary. Welcome to K-Stories by Emma. Before we continue, please like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any story. The Greenbrier Resort's crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across Table 12, where an $85 million contract sat like a loaded weapon. Zuri Mensah balanced the champagne tray on her shoulder, her uniform pressed so crisp it could cut, her face a mask of professional neutrality. She moved through the private dining hall like expensive wallpaper, noticed only when something went wrong. 3 years of risk management and insurance degree from West Virginia University. 2 years of corporate rejection letters from Charleston to Morgantown. 0 callbacks. Now she was pouring Dom Perignon from men who made more in an hour than she'd see in 5 years. The private dining hall at White Sulphur Springs was reserved for high-profile international guests, code for people whose names didn't belong on public reservation lists. Gerald, the sweating manager, had briefed the staff that morning with barely concealed panic in his voice. Absolute discretion, no questions, no lingering, pour, smile, disappear. Zuri had perfected the art of disappearing. In a world that constantly overlooked her, despite her 3.8 GPA, despite her fluency in 3 languages, despite her published thesis on corporate risk mitigation, invisibility had become survival. Quick pause. About 80% of people watching haven't subscribed yet, and we think you might be one of them. If you're enjoying the stories and want us to keep making more, consider showing your support by hitting that subscribe button today. Now let's get back to the story. But what Gerald didn't know, what he'd never bothered to ask during her 10-minute interview 6 months ago, was that Zuri Mensah had spent 3 years studying abroad at the University of Johannesburg, and she spoke fluent Zulu. As she approached Table 12 with fresh champagne, Zuri allowed herself one quick glance at the men seated there. The Korean businessman sat at the head, mid-30s, devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her rent. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that tracked movement like a predator tracking prey. Daniel Seo, she'd heard the name whispered by the kitchen staff. Tech mogul, real estate empire. Don't stare directly at him. Across from him sat a broad-shouldered South African man with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. Expensive watch, custom suit, the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Between them sat the translator, young, professional, his laptop open, his expression carefully neutral. His name tag read Quinton Ibarra. And on the table, cream-colored paper bound in leather, the contract. Zuri poured champagne into crystal flutes, her movements practiced and smooth. The men barely acknowledged her presence. She was furniture, background noise, invisible. The South African investor began speaking, his Zulu flowing easily, confidently. The translator's fingers flew across his keyboard, then he turned to Daniel and spoke in Korean. Zuri's hand didn't shake as she set down the champagne bottle, but her mind was screaming. Because what the investor had just said in Zulu, a cautious question about profit distribution fairness, a concern about the 60-40 split favoring Daniel's holding company, had been translated into Korean as enthusiastic praise for the contract's generous and equitable terms. The translator was lying, deliberately, systematically, turning warnings into compliments, erasing concerns, building a trap. And Zuri was the only person in the room who knew it. Zuri's hands trembled as she retreated to the service hallway, pressing her back against the cool wall. Her mind raced back 3 years, to the lecture hall at the University of Johannesburg, to Professor Kumalo's voice echoing through her memory like a warning she couldn't ignore. In risk management, silence is complicity. If you see the trap and say nothing, you are part of the trap. She'd gone to Johannesburg on a scholarship, determined to build a future her mother could be proud of. Tandy Mensah had cleaned houses in Charleston for 20 years to send her daughter to college, her Ghanaian accent still thick despite 2 decades in America, her dreams for Zuri relentless and unshakable. "You will not serve other people's tables," she'd said the day Zuri left for South Africa. "You will sit at your own." But life had other plans. The scholarship covered tuition, not living expenses. Zuri worked 3 part-time jobs just to survive, tutoring international students in English, translating documents for small businesses in Sandton, serving at upscale restaurants where wealthy men discussed deals over wine that cost more than her monthly rent. That's where she'd learned the real language of power. How wealthy men spoke in code, how contracts hid traps in footnotes and subsections, how a smile could be a weapon sharper than any knife. She'd returned to West Virginia with honors, glowing references, and hope burning bright in her chest. Then came the rejection emails. Overqualified for entry level, lack of local experience, not the right cultural fit. Translation: "You're brilliant, but we don't see you at our table." 6 months ago, her mother's diabetes worsened. The medical bills started piling up. Insulin that cost $400 a month, specialist visits, emergency room trips when her blood sugar crashed in the middle of the night. Zuri had taken the server position at the Greenbrier out of pure desperation, her risk management degree gathering dust in her studio apartment overlooking the Kanawha River. Every night she went home to spreadsheets. Income versus debt. The numbers never balanced. She was drowning in slow motion, watching her dreams slip away, one unpaid bill at a time. Through the service window, she could see table 12. The investor was speaking again in Zulu, his tone cautious, probing. "The arbitration clause concerns me, Daniel. Why must all disputes be settled in Johannesburg under South African law? That puts my company at significant disadvantage." The translator smiled, nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Daniel and spoke in Korean with reassuring confidence. Zuri didn't speak Korean, but she didn't need to. The translator's body language told her everything. Relaxed posture, encouraging gestures, the kind of smooth delivery that said, "Everything is fine. Sign now. Don't worry." He was erasing the investor's concerns, flipping warnings into endorsements, building a trap brick by brick. This wasn't a simple mistranslation. This was deliberate, systematic, coordinated. Someone was setting a trap, and Daniel So was walking straight into it. Zuri's breath caught in her throat. She could walk away right now, finish her shift, collect her paycheck, pay this month's medical bills, stay invisible, stay safe. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from her mother asking if she'd remembered to pick up the insulin prescription. The weight of that message pressed against her ribs like a physical thing. Or she could do what Professor Kumalo had taught her, see the trap, say something. But saying something meant risking everything, her job, her income, her ability to keep her mother alive. Zuri closed her eyes, heard her mother's voice again. "You will sit at your own table." She straightened her uniform, picked up the water pitcher with hands that had stopped shaking, and walked back toward table 12. Her mother didn't raise a coward. Even if it cost her everything, she would not be silent. Not today. Daniel Seo didn't look like a man who needed saving. He sat with the kind of stillness that suggested absolute control. Spine straight, shoulders relaxed, hands resting on the table like he owned the air around him. His face was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, a jawline that could cut glass, dark eyes that missed nothing. When he spoke Korean, his voice was low, measured, dangerous in its calm. Zuri had served powerful men before, senators, CEOs, men who threw around money like confetti and expected the world to bow. But Daniel Seo was different. He didn't demand attention, he consumed it. The room bent toward him without him saying a word. The South African investor, Peter van Rensburg, according to the reservation list, was his opposite in every way. Loud, gregarious, all white teeth and expansive gestures that filled the space around him. He wore his wealth casually, Rolex watch catching the chandelier light, custom-tailored suit that probably cost $15,000, Italian loafers polished to a mirror shine. When he laughed, it filled the room like thunder. When he spoke Zulu, his accent was Durban polished, the kind that came from private schools and generational wealth. The translator sat between them like a bridge connecting two worlds. His name tag read Quentin Ibarra, mid-20s, West African features, impeccable posture. His eyes were dead. As Zuri refilled water glasses, her risk management training kicked in automatically. She analyzed the power dynamic the way she'd been taught. Daniel held the capital, Peter needed the partnership, Quentin controlled the information flow. Classic triangulation. But something was off. Peter's body language was too confident for someone negotiating with a man of Daniel's reputation. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed, almost expectant, like someone who already knew exactly how this meeting would end, like he'd already won. Peter spoke again in Zulu, his tone shifting to something more pointed, more challenging. The 60-40 split concerns me, Daniel. My legal team flagged several clauses that seem to favor your holding company exclusively. I need reassurance that this partnership is truly equitable. Otherwise, I cannot in good conscience recommend this to my board. Zuri's pulse spiked. That was a direct challenge, a legitimate concern, the kind of question that should trigger deeper negotiation, legal review, maybe even walking away from the table entirely. Quentin smiled warmly, typed notes on his laptop with quick, efficient keystrokes, then turned to Daniel and spoke in fluid, confident Korean. Zuri didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone, smooth, reassuring, encouraging. She watched Daniel's expression. He listened carefully, nodded once, his fingers tapping the contract's leather binding thoughtfully. Quentin was selling him something, convincing him, erasing Peter's concerns with words Daniel couldn't verify. Zuri's breath stopped. This wasn't a single mistranslation. This was a coordinated deception. Every concern was being flipped into praise. Every question was being erased. Every warning was being turned into enthusiastic endorsement. She glanced at the contract on the table, thick, leather-bound, filled with dense legal language that most people wouldn't scrutinize closely if their trusted translator assured them everything was favorable. Daniel was being led into a trap, and he didn't even know it. The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter, the chandelier light too bright. Zuri set down the water pitcher with hands that had gone perfectly steady. Her heart was a war drum pounding against her ribs, but her hands didn't shake. She leaned toward Daniel under the pretense of adjusting his napkin, her body angled to block Quentin's view, her lips close enough to Daniel's ear that she could smell his cologne, cedar and smoke and something darker. She whispered 4 words that would either save him or destroy her. "Sir, your translator is lying." Time slowed. Zuri felt the heat of Daniel's proximity, smelled his cologne, something dark and expensive, cedar and smoke and power. She saw the almost imperceptible pause in his breathing, the way his fingers stilled on the contract's edge like he was processing information at lightning speed. For 3 heartbeats, the room held its breath. Then Daniel closed the contract folder with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot. He spoke in Korean to Quentin, his tone unchanged, polite, measured, final. Each word landed with the weight of a judge's gavel. Quentin's smile faltered, just for a second, a crack in the professional mask. Peter leaned forward, confusion flickering across his face. "Daniel, is something wrong?" Daniel stood, buttoned his suit jacket with practiced ease, and addressed Peter in English, accented but flawless, every syllable controlled. "My legal team will need 72 hours to review the terms more thoroughly. We'll reconvene next week." Peter's jaw tightened. "I thought we had an understanding. The terms are more than fair." "We will have an understanding," Daniel said smoothly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that ended arguments before they began, after due diligence. He nodded once to Quentin, whose professional mask had cracked into something colder, something calculating. Then Daniel walked out of the private dining hall, his security detail materializing from shadows like ghosts to flank him on either side. Zuri didn't breathe until he was gone. Then she felt it, Quentin's eyes on her, sharp, assessing, dangerous. Peter's gaze followed, equally cold, equally calculating. They knew. She turned away fast, grabbed the empty champagne bottle with trembling hands, and walked toward the service hallway on legs that barely held her weight. 10 minutes later, her boss, Gerald, found her in the staff break room. "What did you say to him?" Gerald's face was crimson, sweat beading on his forehead and upper lip. His voice came out strangled. "Mr. Seo just postponed an $85 million deal. What did you say?" Zuri met his eyes, her voice steady, despite the fear clawing up her throat. "I didn't say anything that wasn't true." "You spoke to a guest during a private negotiation? You violated protocol." Gerald's voice cracked, rising to something near panic. "You embarrassed this resort in front of one of our most important clients. You—" He stopped, breathing hard, his hands shaking. "You're fired. Security will escort you out. Clean out your locker. You're done here." The words landed like blows. Zuri nodded once, too numb to argue, too exhausted to fight. As security walked her through the lobby 15 minutes later, her locker cleaned out, her server apron folded and returned, she saw him, Daniel Seo, standing by the glass doors overlooking the resort gardens, phone to his ear, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. His gaze tracked her movement across the marble floor. Their eyes locked for half a second. His expression revealed nothing. No gratitude, no recognition, no acknowledgement that she'd just saved him from financial ruin. Nothing. Then he looked away, returned his attention to his phone call, and Zuri was escorted through the doors into the parking lot, unemployed, terrified, and utterly alone. She sat in her 15-year-old Honda Civic, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "How was work, baby?" Zuri stared at the message until the words blurred, then at the medical bill notices stuffed in her glove compartment. $847 due next week for insulin, $1,200 for the specialist visit, $2,300 for the emergency room trip last month. Then at the Greenbrier's glowing facade in her rearview mirror. She'd done the right thing, and it had cost her everything. Zuri didn't leave her apartment for 3 days. She sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, refreshing job sites that never had new postings. Her savings account balance mocked her every time she checked it. $847. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Her mother's insulin prescription needed refilling in 10 days. The math was simple and brutal. She was running out of time. Day 1, she applied to 12 positions. Corporate risk analyst, contract reviewer, insurance underwriter, jobs she was overqualified for. jobs that would never call her back. Day 2, she contacted every staffing agency in Charleston, Morgantown, and Huntington, left voicemails that went unreturned, sent emails that disappeared into the void. Day 3, she drafted a message to Professor Kumalo in Johannesburg, asking if he knew anyone hiring in the U.S. Her finger hovered over the send button for 20 minutes before she deleted it. What was the point? Every hour she checked her phone. No calls, no emails, nothing. At night, she replayed the moment at table 12 on an endless loop. Daniel's pause when she whispered the warning, Quentin's cold stare after Daniel postponed the meeting, Peter's calculating eyes tracking her across the lobby. She wondered if she'd misheard the Zulu, if she'd overreacted, if she'd destroyed her life over a mistake her exhausted brain had conjured up. But then she'd remember Professor Kumalo's voice from 3 years ago. Trust your training. Trust what you know. She knew what she'd heard. The translator had been lying, deliberately, systematically, and now she was paying the price for telling the truth. Her mother called twice. Zuri didn't answer. How could she explain that she'd been fired for doing the right thing? That her degree, the one Tandi Mensa had sacrificed 20 years of her life to pay for, meant nothing? That she was back to zero? You will not serve other people's tables, her mother had said. But what if serving tables was all she'd ever be allowed to do? What if this was it, the ceiling, the limit, the end of the story? On the third evening, just as the sun was setting over the Kanawha River, her phone rang. Unknown number, Oklahoma City area code. Zuri almost didn't answer. Her hand hovered over the screen, fear and hope warring in her chest. Then something, instinct, desperation, the last dying ember of hope made her swipe to accept. Miss Mensa? The voice was male, professional, Korean accented. My name is Kang Min Jun. I'm calling on behalf of Daniel Seo. He'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., his office in Charleston. A car will be sent to your address at 9:30. Zuri's heart stopped. Why does he want to see me? He didn't say, but he was insistent. A pause, weighted with meaning. Will you be available? Zuri's mind raced. This could be a lawsuit, retaliation for interfering in a private business meeting. Maybe Quentin or Peter had filed a complaint. Maybe Daniel wanted answers or revenge before he destroyed what little she had left. Or maybe... No, she couldn't afford hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what got you hurt. Yes, she heard herself say anyway. I'll be there. The line clicked dead. Zuri didn't sleep that night. She researched Daniel Seo until her eyes burned and her laptop battery died twice. Tech ventures, real estate empire, philanthropic foundations. Every article called him reclusive, strategic, untouchable. One business journal mentioned his family background in passing. Seo comes from a lineage historically associated with organized networks in Seoul, though he has publicly distanced himself from such connections, focusing instead on legitimate enterprise. Translation: Mafia legacy, legal present. At 9:29 a.m., a black Mercedes S-Class pulled up outside her building. Zuri took a breath, grabbed her portfolio, useless now, but armor nonetheless, and walked toward whatever came next. Daniel Seo's Charleston office occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower on Quarrier Street, overlooking the state capitol building like a throne overlooking a kingdom. The elevator ride was silent, smooth, suffocating. Kang Min-jun, Daniel's assistant, tall and stone-faced with the build of someone who'd seen combat, escorted Zuri through corridors that smelled like leather and money. Employees moved with quiet efficiency, their eyes sliding past her like she was invisible again. But this invisibility felt different, intentional, protected, like she was being kept secret. Daniel's office was all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist design, black desk, white walls, a single piece of art, a Korean ink painting of mountains disappearing into mist. He stood with his back to her, hands in his pockets, watching the city below. Ms. Mensa, he didn't turn around. Thank you for coming. Zuri's voice was steadier than she felt. Did I have a choice? That made him turn. His dark eyes studied her with the same intensity she'd seen at table 12, like he was reading a contract, identifying every clause, every risk, every hidden term that could destroy him. "Yes," he said simply, "you always have a choice." He gestured to the chair across from his. Zuri sat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, refusing to show fear. Daniel sat opposite her, leaning back with unsettling ease. "I need you to tell me exactly what you heard at that meeting, word for word." Zuri had prepared for this. She pulled out her notebook, flipped to the pages where she'd transcribed everything from memory: Peter's questions in Zulu, Quentin's false translations, the timeline of deception. She spoke for 10 minutes, translating every exchange, explaining the discrepancies, pointing out the pattern of manipulation. When she finished, the room was silent. Daniel's expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had sharpened, something cold and calculating and utterly ruthless. "How do you know Zulu?" he asked quietly. "I studied abroad, University of Johannesburg, 3 years." "And you understood my Korean?" "No, but I understood his lies in Zulu. That was enough." Daniel opened a drawer and pulled out the contract from table 12. He slid it across the desk. "My legal team reviewed this after our meeting. Show me what you think they found." Zuri opened the leather folder, her training kicking in automatically. It took her 12 minutes to identify 17 hidden clauses. Profit splits that shifted dramatically after year 2, turning Daniel's 60% into effective 30%. Intellectual property transfers buried in subsections that would give Peter control of Daniel's patents. Liability waivers that made Daniel personally responsible for Peter's debts and legal violations. An arbitration clause requiring all disputes to be settled in Johannesburg under South African law, Peter's home court advantage. It wasn't a partnership contract. It was a trap designed to transfer Daniel's empire piece by piece until he owned nothing but debt and legal liability. "You have a degree in risk management," Daniel said, not a question. "From West Virginia University, 3.8 GPA, published thesis on corporate fraud detection, 0 job offers." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Why?" Zuri met his eyes. "You tell me." For the first time, something like respect flickered across his face. "I want to hire you, personal risk manager. You review every contract before I sign. You attend every negotiation. You identify every trap before I walk into it." Zuri's breath stopped. "Why would you trust me?" "Because you risked everything to tell me the truth when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose." He leaned forward. "Starting salary, $120,000. Benefits, housing stipend, your mother's medical bills covered in full." Zuri's vision blurred. That was more money than she'd ever imagined making. "There's one condition," Daniel continued, his voice dropping lower. "The people who tried to trap me, they'll know you exposed them, and they won't forgive that." Zuri's pulse spiked. "Are you saying I'm in danger?" Daniel's smile was cold enough to frost glass. "I'm saying that as of this moment, you're under my protection. No one touches what's mine." The weight of those words settled over her like a claim, like ownership. "Do we have a deal, Miss Mensah?" Zuri stood in a glass-walled conference room in Oklahoma City reviewing a $40 million commercial real estate contract while 6 lawyers waited for her assessment. She wore a tailored charcoal suit Daniel's team had purchased for her, her natural hair pulled back in an elegant bun, her voice calm and authoritative as she pointed out 3 liability clauses that would have bankrupted the development project within 18 months. The lead attorney, a white man in his 50s who'd initially looked at her like she was the coffee girl, now took notes on everything she said. This was her life now. Unrecognizable, terrifying, exhilarating. Daniel's operation was vast and meticulous. He owned commercial properties across 6 states, tech startups in Silicon Valley, import-export channels through Seattle and Los Angeles. Every deal crossed Zuri's desk before it reached his. She worked from a private office adjacent to his, glass walls, standing desk, 3 monitors displaying contracts in multiple languages. Kang Min-jun brought her Korean translations. She hired a Mandarin specialist for Chinese contracts. She learned the patterns of corporate deception, the clauses hidden in appendices, the definitions buried in footnotes, the shell companies designed to obscure ownership. She was brilliant at it, and everyone knew it. Her mother called every Sunday. Zuri wired money home, enough to cover medical bills, enough to hire a home care nurse, enough that Fondi Mensah could finally stop cleaning other people's houses after 20 years. "What kind of job is this?" her mother asked, suspicious and proud in equal measure. "Risk management," Zuri said, which was true. For a private equity firm, which was close enough. She didn't mention that her boss had a family legacy tied to organized networks in Seoul, or that his security detail carried weapons, or that she signed an NDA so airtight it could survive a nuclear blast. But working closely with Daniel meant noticing things, like how his calm never cracked, even when a deal fell through, even when someone tried to double-cross him. He simply adjusted, recalculated, won anyway. Like how his employees were loyal to the point of devotion. They didn't just respect him, they feared disappointing him. Like how he never raised his voice, but when he spoke, rooms went silent. And like how sometimes, when they worked late reviewing contracts, she'd catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't name, something between curiosity and possession. 3 weeks in, Zuri had identified a sabotage attempt, a tech acquisition where the target company's financials had been falsified. Daniel had been hours from signing. Zuri's analysis saved him $15 million. He'd called her into his office afterward, poured whiskey into 2 glasses even though she didn't drink, and said, "You're the best investment I've ever made." She'd laughed it off, made a joke about ROI and risk mitigation, but the way he'd looked at her like she was a puzzle he was solving piece by piece had stayed with her for days. On a Thursday evening in late October, Zuri returned to her Charleston apartment, the same studio overlooking the Kanawha River, because she hadn't had time to move yet, carrying Thai takeout and a contract that needed review by morning. She unlocked her door, stepped inside, and froze. Someone had been in her apartment. The realization hit her like ice water. Her coffee table was shifted 3 inches to the left. Her kitchen drawers hung open. Files she'd left stacked on her desk were scattered across the floor. And standing by her window, backlit by Charleston's city lights, was a man she'd never seen before. Mid-40s, expensive suit, cold eyes. He smiled slowly, the kind of smile that warned of violence wrapped in politeness. "Hello, Miss Mensah." Her South African accent turned her name into something dangerous. "We need to talk about your new employer." Zuri's hand was already moving toward her phone, muscle memory from Daniel's security training kicking in automatically. But the intruder raised his hand in a calming gesture, his voice smooth and unbothered. "I wouldn't do that. We're just going to have a conversation." He was mid-40s, expensively dressed in the suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary, the kind of casual confidence that came from never being told no. His eyes were cold calculation. "Who are you?" Zuri's voice didn't shake. Small miracle. "Someone who wants to offer you a way out before things get complicated." He walked closer, not threatening, just inevitable, like gravity. "You've made some powerful people very unhappy, Miss Mensah. That contract you flagged at the Greenbrier, the tech acquisition you stopped 3 weeks ago, those were our operations. 18 months of groundwork, millions invested, all gone because you're too clever for your own good. Our operations, plural." Zuri's mind raced. This wasn't random, this was coordinated, organized. "Daniel Seo thinks he can build an empire on legitimate business," the man continued, his tone almost pitying. "He thinks he can distance himself from his family's legacy, play by society's rules, be respectable. He's wrong, and you're helping him believe a dangerous lie." "What do you want?" Zuri asked, her hand still inching toward her phone in her pocket. "Resign. Walk away. We'll compensate you generously, enough to cover your mother's medical expenses for the next decade, enough to start over anywhere you want, maybe back in Johannesburg. I hear you enjoyed it there." The mention of her mother made Zuri's blood run cold. They'd done their homework. They knew everything. "And if I don't?" His smile vanished like smoke. "Then you become a problem that needs to be solved, and we're very good at solving problems, Miss Mensah." Zuri's pulse hammered in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to agree, to take the money, to disappear before she became another solved problem. But then she heard her mother's voice. "You will sit at your own table." She thought of Daniel's quiet trust when he'd hired her without hesitation. She thought of the contracts she'd saved, the traps she'd identified, the empire she was helping protect. "Get out of my apartment," she said, her voice steady as stone. The man's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake." A knock at the door. Sharp, authoritative, 3 precise strikes. The intruder's eyes flicked toward the sound, and for the first time, something like concern flickered across his face. Zuri's phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from Kang Min-jun. "Mr. Seo is outside your door. Urgent contract matter. Let him in." The intruder's jaw clenched. He looked at Zuri, then at the door, calculating his options in half a second. Then he moved, fast, toward the window, onto the fire escape, disappearing into the October night like he'd never been there at all. Zuri's legs nearly gave out. She opened the door with shaking hands. Daniel stood in the hallway, 2 security guards flanking him, his dark eyes sweeping her apartment with lethal precision, noting the scattered files, the moved furniture, the open drawers. "Are you hurt?" His voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it, dangerous in its calm. "No, he didn't touch me. He just threatened me, told me to resign." Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted, like a predator scenting blood. "Did he say who sent him?" "No, but he knew about the tech acquisition. He called it our operation, plural, and he knew about my mother, about Johannesburg." Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Inside job. Zuri's breath caught. "You think someone in your organization?" "I think," Daniel interrupted softly, "that you're no longer safe here." 20 minutes later, Zuri was in the back of Daniel's car, a security detail following in a second vehicle. Her hands were still shaking. "Where are we going?" she asked. Daniel didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the passing city lights. "Tulsa. I have a secured property there. You'll stay until we identify who's behind this." "I can't just leave." "You can," he said, finally turning to face her. His eyes held hers, dark and unreadable. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something almost possessive. "You're under my personal protection, and no one touches what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat curling through her chest. The Tulsa penthouse occupied the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking the Arkansas River. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture in shades of white and gray, security cameras in every corner, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly isolated. Zuri stood in the living room at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, watching the city lights blur below through exhausted eyes. Daniel had left her here with 2 security guards stationed outside the door and instructions to rest. Rest, as if her mind could quiet after everything that had happened. Daniel returned the next morning carrying coffee and a tablet loaded with encrypted files. He'd shed his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and looked almost human for once. Tired, concerned. "We need to talk about who's targeting you," he said, settling onto the couch across from her. Zuri wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. Black, no sugar, exactly how she liked it. He'd remembered. "You mean who's targeting you? I'm just collateral damage." "You're not collateral," Daniel said sharply. Then, softer, "You're the reason my empire is still intact. That makes you valuable, and valuable things attract dangerous attention." He pulled up files on the tablet, headshots, corporate profiles, financial records. These are the people with access to our internal operations. One of them hired that man to threaten you." Zuri scanned the faces: executives, lawyers, business partners, all polished, professional, trustworthy. "How do we narrow it down?" she asked. "We wait," Daniel said. "They won't move while you're under my protection, but eventually they'll make another play, and when they do, we'll be ready." Days blurred into weeks. Daniel worked from the Tulsa office, but he came to the penthouse every evening, ostensibly to review contracts, but Zuri suspected it was also to check on her. They fell into a rhythm, working side by side at the dining table, debating contract clauses, arguing over risk assessments. Daniel was brilliant, ruthless, and infuriatingly right most of the time, but he listened when Zuri pushed back, respected her analysis even when it contradicted his instincts. Late one night, after closing a $30 million deal, Daniel poured them both whiskey. "You don't drink," Zuri pointed out. "Special occasion," he said, handing her a glass. They sat in comfortable silence, the city glittering below them like scattered diamonds. "Why did you really distance yourself from your family's legacy?" Zuri asked quietly. Daniel's expression shuddered. Then, slowly, he answered, "Because I watched my father build an empire on fear. He was powerful, respected, untouchable, and he died alone, surrounded by people who were loyal only because they were terrified." He met her eyes. "I wanted to build something different, something that lasted because it was just, not because people were afraid to tear it down." "Do you think you've succeeded?" Zuri asked. Daniel's smile was bitter. "Ask me when we find out who's trying to destroy everything I've built." Zuri sat down her glass and did something reckless. She reached across the table and touched his hand. His fingers stilled under hers, warm, calloused, human. "You're not your father," she said softly. Daniel's gaze dropped to where their hands connected, then back to her face. Something shifted in his expression, guard lowering, wall cracking. "And you're not invisible," he said, his voice rough. "Not to me." The air between them thickened, charged with electricity. He leaned forward slightly. Zuri's breath caught. Their faces were inches apart, his dark eyes searching hers for permission, hesitation, certainty. Her phone buzzed. They both pulled back like they'd been burned. Zuri grabbed her phone, a text from her mother asking about Thanksgiving plans. Daniel stood abruptly, clearing his throat. "It's late, you should rest." He was gone before Zuri could find words. Zuri sat alone in the dark penthouse, her hand still tingling where she'd touched his. This was dangerous. Not the threats, not the enemies hiding in his organization. The way her heart raced when Daniel walked into a room. The way she'd started noticing things, how he took his coffee, the scar on his left hand, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her. She was falling for the Korean Mafia boss, and that was the most dangerous trap of all. 3 weeks of protective isolation, no attacks, no threats, nothing. Zuri paced the penthouse like a caged animal. She was safe, yes, but she was also useless, stuck in a gilded tower while Daniel's enemy remained hidden, untouchable, patient. She found Daniel in his home office, reviewing acquisition reports, his tie loosened, exhaustion evident in the tension of his shoulders. "This isn't working," she said without preamble. He looked up, guarded. "You're safe. That's what's working." "I'm bait, sitting in storage," Zuri countered. "Your enemy won't move while I'm under your protection. They're too smart for that. So we're at a stalemate, and meanwhile, they're still inside your organization, still planning, still waiting." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What are you suggesting?" Zuri sat across from him, her proposal fully formed. "We make them think I'm no longer protected, stage a public falling out. I resign, move back to Charleston, return to my normal life. They'll believe I'm vulnerable again." "Absolutely not." "Listen to me," Zuri insisted. "You have the best security team I've ever seen. You can put surveillance on me without anyone knowing. When they make their move, and they will, you'll be ready to intercept them. We'll finally know who's behind this." Daniel stood, his control slipping into something raw. You're asking me to use you as bait. I'm asking you to let me help end this. By putting yourself in danger? I'm already in danger, Zuri's voice rose. Hiding doesn't change that. At least this way, we're in control. You don't understand what these people are capable of. I understand perfectly, Zuri shot back. One of them was in my apartment, Daniel. I looked him in the eye. I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be locked away. I know you're not fragile, Daniel said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. That's not why I'm saying no. Then why? He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the small office. Because if something happens to you, if they hurt you because I wasn't there. He stopped, jaw clenched, the words caught somewhere between admission and restraint. Zuri's breath hitched. You can't protect me forever. Watch me try. They stared at each other, the air crackling with tension that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the truth neither of them had spoken aloud. Finally, Zuri said quietly, What's your alternative? Keep me here until they give up? They won't. You know they won't. Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He turned away, staring out the window at Tulsa's skyline. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. If we do this, it's on my terms. Complete surveillance, armed detail within 30 seconds of you at all times. The moment they approach you, the operation ends. Agreed. And you follow every protocol. No improvising, no heroics. Agreed. He turned back to face her, his expression carved from stone. If anything goes wrong, Zuri stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from him. It won't. We're smarter than them. It's not about being smart, Daniel said softly, his guard finally, fully dropping. It's about the fact that He stopped, swallowed hard. You've become important to me, Zuri. More important than any deal, any contract, any empire. Her heart stopped. Daniel. Don't, he said, stepping back. Don't say anything, not yet, not until this is over and you're safe. 2 days later, Zuri stood in Daniel's Charleston office with Kang Min-jun and 3 lawyers as witnesses. I resign, effective immediately, she said, her voice carrying across the room, loud enough for anyone listening. I appreciate the opportunity, but I can't continue working under these conditions. Daniel's expression was ice. Understood. Security will escort you out. As she walked through the building for the last time, employees whispered. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked satisfied. One of them was the traitor, and in 72 hours Zuri would know which one. The trap was set. Zuri's Charleston apartment felt smaller than she remembered. Emptier. She unpacked her single suitcase, arranged her laptop on the kitchen table, and tried to ignore the weight of invisible eyes watching her through cameras Daniel's team had installed in every corner. She was alone. Except she wasn't. Day 1. She applied to corporate jobs, her resume uploaded to every hiring site. Normal, predictable. Day 2, she grocery shopped, walked along the Kanawha River, had coffee at a cafe on Capitol Street. Routine, unremarkable. Day 3, she received a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Same offer as before. Last chance. Tomorrow, 8 p.m., Haddad Riverfront Park. Come alone. Zuri's hands trembled as she forwarded the message to Daniel. His response was immediate. We'll be Medi. Stay calm. Follow the plan. That evening, Daniel called her, not texted, called. How are you holding up? His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept in days. I'm fine, Zuri lied. Zuri. She closed her eyes. I'm terrified, but I'm fine. A long pause. Then, my team will be positioned around the park. Kang will be in a vehicle 50 meters away. If anything feels wrong, anything, you say the code word and we extract you immediately. I know the protocol. Say it anyway. Magnolia, Zuri recited. If I say Magnolia, extraction happens within 15 seconds. Good. Another pause. Zuri, after tomorrow, when this is over. Don't, she whispered, echoing his words from days ago. Not yet, not until it's over. She heard him exhale slowly. Be safe. You too. The line went silent, but neither of them hung up. They stayed connected, breathing in tandem across the miles, until finally Daniel said, "Get some rest. I'll see you tomorrow." "I'll see you tomorrow. Not my team will see you. Him. He was going to be there." 8 p.m. Haddad Riverfront Park. November cold bit through Zuri's jacket as she walked toward the designated meeting spot, a bench overlooking the river, lamplight casting long shadows across the frozen grass. The man from her apartment was already there. "Ms. Mensah, I'm glad you came to your senses." Zuri sat, keeping distance between them. "I want to hear the offer again, all the details." He smiled, pulling out a phone. "Smart woman, here's the transfer amount." A second figure emerged from the shadows behind the bench. Zuri's pulse spiked. This wasn't part of the plan. The newcomer was a woman, mid-50s, impeccably dressed in a camel coat and designer heels. Zuri recognized her immediately from the files Daniel had shown her weeks ago. Lorraine Vega, Daniel's head corporate attorney, the woman who'd worked with him for 8 years, trusted, respected, loyal. Or so everyone thought. "Lorraine?" Zuri's voice cracked with genuine shock. The attorney's smile was cold as winter steel. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble, Ms. Mensah, but you're also remarkably intelligent. Too intelligent to waste on Daniel's naive dream of legitimate business. You hired the translator, the tech acquisition, all of it." "Daniel refuses to use the tools his family built," Lorraine said, her voice dripping with contempt. "He wants to play by rules that were never designed for people like us. It's insulting. So yes, I've been redirecting certain opportunities to partners who appreciate the value of his legacy." The South African man stepped closer. "Last chance, Ms. Mensah. Walk away with enough money to disappear, or—" Zuri stood abruptly. Her voice was steady, clear, deliberate. "You know what I love about magnolia trees? They bloom even after the coldest winters." Chaos erupted. Floodlights blazed from every direction, turning night into day. Security vehicles surrounded the park, tires screeching. Armed guards materialized from every shadow, behind trees, inside parked cars, on rooftops. And Daniel Seo stepped into the light, his expression carved from fury and ice. "Hello, Lorraine. We need to talk about your resignation." Lorraine Vega didn't run. She stood frozen, her face a mask of calculation crumbling into panic. The South African man bolted, made it 15 feet before 2 security guards tackled him to the frozen ground. Daniel walked toward Lorraine with the kind of calm that preceded devastation. 8 years, he said quietly. "I trusted you with everything." "You're wasting your legacy," Lorraine spat, recovering some defiance. "Your father built an empire on power, and you're squandering it playing CEO. I was trying to salvage." "You were trying to steal," Daniel interrupted, his voice colder than the November wind, "and you used my name to do it." Over the next 72 hours, Daniel dismantled Lorraine's operation with surgical precision. Hour 12, forensic accountants traced shell companies back to Lorraine's offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, $40 million in redirected funds recovered. Hour 24, the translator, Quentin Ibarra, was located in Atlanta and cooperated fully in exchange for immunity. He provided recordings of Lorraine's instructions, emails detailing the sabotage timeline, wire transfer receipts. Hour 36, Peter van Rensburg, the South African investor, was arrested by Interpol in Johannesburg on fraud and conspiracy charges. His cooperation exposed 3 other corporate attorneys working with Lorraine across 2 continents. Hour 48, Daniel's legal team filed a lawsuit so comprehensive, so airtight, that Lorraine's personal assets were frozen within hours. Her reputation, built over decades, was destroyed in a single news cycle. Hour 60, the South African man, identified as Lorraine's hired enforcer, Thabo and Kosi was handed over to federal authorities. His cooperation provided evidence of additional extortion schemes targeting Daniel's competitors. Hour 72, Lorraine Vega was formally charged with corporate espionage, fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Her law license was revoked. Her legacy was ash. Zuri watched it unfold from Daniel's Charleston office, both awed and unsettled by the efficiency of his retribution. "You could have just fired her," she said quietly on the third night. Daniel looked up from his laptop, exhaustion evident in the shadows under his eyes. "She threatened you. She tried to destroy everything I built, and she did it using my family's reputation as cover. So this is personal?" "Everything is personal, Zuri." He closed the laptop. "But it's also justice. She hurt people, employees who trusted her, investors she defrauded, you. This isn't revenge, it's consequences." "What happens now?" Zuri asked. Daniel stood, walked to the window overlooking Charleston's lights. "Now I rebuild. I fire every executive she corrupted. I audit every deal she touched. I make sure nothing like this happens again." "That's not what I meant." He turned to face her, understanding dawning in his dark eyes. "What did you mean?" Zuri took a breath. "What happens to us?" Daniel crossed the room slowly, stopping just close enough that Zuri had to tilt her head to meet his gaze. "I want to build something," he said softly. "Not just an empire, something that matters. A foundation that helps people like you. Brilliant, overlooked, underestimated. People who deserve a seat at the table they've been denied." Zuri's breath caught. "Why?" "Because you showed me that the best investments aren't in contracts or properties. They're in people, in truth, in building something that lasts because it's right." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, his touch gentle, reverent. "And I want to build it with you, not as my employee, as my partner." "Daniel," Zuri's voice broke, "tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if this is one-sided, if I've misread everything." She kissed him. Soft at first, tentative, testing, then deeper as his arms came around her, pulling her close. He tasted like coffee and relief, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious, breakable, essential. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Zuri whispered, "Not one-sided." Daniel's laugh was shaky, disbelieving. "Thank God." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. Then he rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me," he murmured. "Not to the penthouse, not to a safe house. Home." Zuri's heart thundered. "Where's home?" "Wherever you are." The Foundation's opening ceremony took place on a bright May morning in Charleston, West Virginia. The building, a converted historic property on Capitol Street, gleamed with fresh paint and possibility. Above the entrance, brass letters spelled out, "The Invisible Voices Initiative." Zuri stood on the steps in a fitted emerald dress, her natural hair styled in elegant twists, watching donors and dignitaries arrive. Beside her, Daniel adjusted his tie. Charcoal suit, white shirt, no armor today. Just a man who'd chosen to build instead of destroy. The initiative's mission was simple: identify brilliant, overlooked professionals, particularly people of color, immigrants, first-generation college students, and place them in corporate roles that matched their qualifications. Scholarships, mentorship, legal support for those facing discrimination. Zuri was the executive director. Daniel funded it entirely. "Nervous?" he asked quietly as the crowd gathered. "Terrified," Zuri admitted. "What if it doesn't work?" Daniel's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining where no one could see. "Then we adjust and try again. That's what we do." "We." 6 months, and the word still sent warmth through her chest. Zuri stepped to the microphone. Cameras flashed. She saw her mother in the front row, tears already streaming down Tandi Menza's face. 18 months ago, Zuri began, her voice steady, I was serving champagne to men who didn't see me. I had a degree, skills, and 0 opportunities. I was invisible. She paused, letting the weight of that word settle over the crowd. Today, I stand here because someone chose to see me, not despite my background, but because of my truth. Her eyes found Daniel's. He was watching her like she was the only person in the world. This foundation exists for everyone who's been told they're not the right fit, who've been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. We see you, and we're going to make sure the world sees you too. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, Daniel pulled Zuri into a quiet corridor away from the celebration. "That speech," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're going to change lives." "We're going to change lives," Zuri corrected. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "I have something for you." He pulled out a small velvet box. Zuri's heart stopped. "Daniel, it's not what you think," he said quickly, though his ears were red. "Not yet. We've only been together 6 months, and I want to do this right." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, a magnolia flower. "For the woman who taught me that blooming after winter is possible," he said softly. Zuri's vision blurred with tears. Daniel clasped the necklace around her throat, his fingers lingering on her skin. Then he turned her to face him, his hands settling on her waist. "I love you," he said. Simple, direct, terrifying. Zuri's breath caught. "You've never said that before." "I know. I was waiting until I was sure you'd stay." "I'm not going anywhere." "Then I love you, Zuri Mensah, and I'm going to keep saying it until you're tired of hearing it." "I'll never be tired of it." He kissed her then, slow, deep, full of promise. When they pulled apart, Zuri whispered against his lips, "I love you too, even though you're terrifying and overprotective, and you reorganize my files when you think I'm not looking." Daniel's laugh was bright and genuine. "Guilty." That evening, they stood on the rooftop of the new foundation building, watching Charleston's lights come alive against the darkening sky. "What comes next?" Zuri asked, leaning into Daniel's warmth. "We expand to 5 more cities. We place 1,000 professionals in the first year. We prove that investing in people, really investing, changes everything." "And personally?" He pulled her closer, his chin resting on her head. "Personally? I ask you to marry me in about 6 months. You say yes, we blend our cultures in a wedding that makes both our mothers cry. We build an empire together, not of money, but of change." Zuri smiled against his chest. "That's pretty specific. I'm good at planning." "What if I say no?" "You won't." His confidence was infuriating and endearing in equal measure. Zuri turned in his arms, looking up at him. "How do you know?" Daniel's expression softened. "Because you don't run from hard things. You walk toward them, and I'm the luckiest man alive that you chose to walk toward me." 18 months ago, Zuri Mensah had whispered a warning to a dangerous man over a champagne tray. Today, she stood beside him as an equal, building something that would outlast both of them. She'd come to pour drinks for the powerful. She'd stayed to become powerful herself. And somewhere in the space between a lie and the truth, between invisibility and being seen, she'd found something she'd stopped believing was possible. A seat at her own table, a voice that mattered, and a love that chose her, not despite the risk, but because of her courage. The Korean Mafia boss and the overlooked waitress. Together they built an empire. Not of fear, of hope. The end. Thank you for joining K-Stories by Emma for this incredible journey. If you loved this story, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything. Until next time, believe in love, fight for what matters, and never give up on redemption. This is Emma, signing off.